Okay, I'm back with another quilt video. Here I've made a tiki quilt with flamingos and flowers, palm trees, and some fire. So I'm going to show you how I made this. I totally designed this from scratch and it was a process, so here it goes. Okay, so here I am designing the totem pole. These are the teeth. I'm using a quilting ruler, number 2 pencil, and just some butcher paper. I often use gift wrap paper because it's a lot cheaper and more convenient, and you'll see later on when I do that. But here I'm using just a butcher paper to do my totem pole because I can see clearly. So here I am, I'm drawing the mouth, teeth, eyes. I cut out my totem pole, trace out in Sharpie, make sure that that's the design that I want. Okay, I wanted to make a colorful totem pole, but that wound up changing mid-filming. Okay, here I am using a tracing wheel to make the markings onto the other side. So I just drew half of the totem pole and traced out the other side with the tracing wheel, and then I went ahead with the Sharpie and I filled in all of the lines to match the other side. Okay, I'm using a fat quarter, so I think this is a fat quarter, and I'm planning out, I just cut out a piece so that I can iron on some heat and bond. And here's the heat and bond, and it worked out that I just needed a straight piece, so that was great. I ironed it on. I just put a speaker on there to hold it as a weight while I trace out my totem pole. Okay, and then I'm tracing the markings on because there are some portions that I will be cutting out. I wind up cutting out the mouth and the eyes. And here I am cutting out the totem pole. Okay, I put it on there to make sure that everything's okay, and it seems like it is. Tracing out my mouth, my eyes, and my markings again onto this is the heat and bond light, and the fabric is on the underside of this. Okay, did the eyes a little bit different, and you'll see later on in the video. I didn't quite make the pupils the way they are on the heat and bond, the way I traced them out. Okay, and that's it. That's what I'll be using. Now here I am. Like I said, I wanted to make it a colorful tiki totem pole, but I wound up cutting out this purple fabric. I ironed it on, and then once I ironed it on, I decided that I didn't care for it. Something about the purple and the brown just didn't work well, or at least this purple and brown didn't work well. The brown that I'm using is a wood fabric from Joann, and I'll link that below. This purple is an old doll print fabric, and it wound up not looking good. So the first thing that I do is I iron on the teeth because that's the bottom part. So I plan that out. I iron that on, checking placement, trimming it where I need it to be trimmed. Here I am peeling back the heat and bond light. I'm getting ready to press it on, and there I am pressing it on. Okay, make sure that it does a good job. And I decided to go with the fire instead of the purple, or rather the red doll fabric. Matryoshkas, it was a red Matryoshka doll print fabric that I got from Joann, and I decided not to use that. It wasn't working well for me. And I'm really glad that I went with the fire theme. So here I've changed the mouth and the wrinkles at the forehead I've gone and done in the same fabric. I'm using a zigzag stitch to hold this brown fabric down. This is a brown Willy Wonka fabric that I got. Forgot to change the lighting, so I went ahead and changed that. I'm doing a small zigzag stitch all the way around. And that's basically what I use for the entire quilt. There's some places where I use a straight stitch, but they're in really tight spots where the zigzag would have run off. So here's the mouth. I'm catching I did the inside, I'm doing the outside. Yeah, sorry about the light changes. I kept forgetting to switch the light direction. Because even though here it's easier for you to see on camera, it was very hard for me to see. Now that's the lighting that works for me, but I wind up changing it up. Okay, so I'm doing my sashing right now. And I've ironed on those sugar skulls. Well, they're not sugar skulls, but they're more Day of the Dead with the roses. And it just kept bothering me. My eye just kept going to the roses and the skull. So I wound up changing that. Here I am pinning the sashing down. Had to make sure that the fabric was cut straight before I sew on the sashing. So there I am, sewing on the sashing on all four sides. Okay, the sashing I wound up doing separately with the flannel, and the flannel I used the back side, which is white. So this is just, the blue is just screen printed on. And I just used the white side to give the light blue that's under the quilt a lighter color showing through. So here I've sewn on the sashing, and again, here's my gift wrap that I'm using as a pattern. I'm just cutting it and placing it, trying to decide what works best, what angle works best, because I'm going to make a palm tree. Using this pattern, this fabric for the pattern for the palm tree and the tree leaves. And just playing around with size and design for the leaves here. I like to use gift wrap, like I said, because it's cheap, it's available. I buy it after Christmas. I've had this roll for a couple of years. And I've ironed on here the Heat and Bond Light. And now I've got the fabric on the underside. I'm just cutting out the leaves. Placing them, seeing what works. So I used the Willy Wonka chocolate bar fabric for the tree bark, and I like the way that worked out for that. Okay. Now I'm going to top stitch it, and again I'm using the zigzag stitch. And the only place that I've used a straight stitch on this is where the tree, or rather the leaves on the palm leaves. But on the outer side of the leaves, I've gone ahead and quilted it using a zigzag stitch. Right, if you notice, there's a little bit of thickness to this fabric, and the reason is because I'm stitching on top of the flannel. I've already placed the flannel on the underside of the quilt, so I'm already stitching on top of that, and I like how that worked out for me. Okay, so I'm doing all of the leaves, and it's down the center of the leaf where I'm using a straight stitch. Originally, I went with a light green on the outer part of the leaves and the tree, and I wound up having to go back and go over it with a black embroidery thread because I liked the way that looked better. It seemed to give it more definition and more depth. And here are the new flowers that I'm cutting out. This fabric was a beautiful fabric, and I didn't want to cut into it, but I figured, you know what, let me just go ahead and use these leaves. They're pretty vibrant, colorful, and I thought it would work well with the quilt. So that's what I used. And I'm just fussy cutting around the flowers here. If you don't know what fussy cutting is, it's what I'm doing here. I'm just cutting around the motif or the print to make it a motif so that I can use it, isolating it from whatever's around the fabric, the print. So there it is. And I like this a lot better. Alright, so now I've got my flamingos, and this fabric glows in the dark, which is really nice. Of the whole quilt, these are the only things that glow in the dark, which are the flamingos. And here I'm placing another tree, part of a tree, palm tree, in my print, in my quilt. And again, here I am with the black, going over it with the black thread to give it more definition and depth. And I snip my threads as I go because I don't like the threads hanging as I'm sewing. They just get in the way and they bother me. I don't know. And then what I do at the end is I quilt around, or rather I sew around the quilt, so that when I'm putting the binding on, it just makes it more simple, makes it simpler to sew on my binding. So here I am sewing my binding. I don't ever pin my binding. I just find it's not necessary. I just sew it as I go. I clip my threads also because this quilt had a lot of threads hanging. That brown and green background fabric is kind of like a bark cloth. I'm not sure what it's called, but it had, you know, it's kind of fussy, and so I am sewing on the binding, and I'm almost done with my quilt. Okay, I always start my binding at the bottom, and then I go around the quilt. Here I am. I have 2 more corners. There's one. And for the binding, what I used was again, the Willy Wonka chocolate bar candy binding. And I really like this color for my quilt, and just, you know, tiki related quilting. It's a nice color, and it's got a couple of shades, 2 shades of brown in it, maybe 3. So here I am. That's the last of it. Clip it on an angle, and I am done. Just got to press it, and there it is. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this. There's the back side. Thanks for watching.